Hello everyone and welcome to the Metro Cinema Harry Dean Stanton tribute screening of the 1984 Palme d'Or Prize-winning Paris, Texas, directed by Wim Wenders, and it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce it to you as it is one of my very favourite films. Up on screen here I've put together a series of slides which are a mixture of images from the film, set photography and some of the cast and crew, and also a number of images by photographers Stephen Shaw and William Eggleston, which aren't necessarily in any real order in relation to what I'll be saying, but their context will become apparent over the course of the introduction. I've tried to write about the film in a way that doesn't reveal anything too significant, because for those of you that have yet to see it, I genuinely feel that it's a masterpiece of cinema. For this reason, I'm not going to dissect the narrative of it, and instead focus briefly on some of the visual aspects. I'll just start off by giving you some background on the film and those involved, because it really did bring together an interesting group of people, and Wenders manages to hone quite a wide variety of talents into what is ultimately a very carefully sculpted and succinct artistic vision. So fundamentally, Paris, Texas is a road movie that follows Travis, played by Harry Dean Stanton, as he tries to reconnect with his family after a long and unexplained absence. Thematically, it is often compared to John Ford's 1956 film The Searchers, but I also think it bears some close resemblances to Monty Hellman's Two-Lane Blacktop from 1971, which also features Harry Dean Stanton, albeit in a small role. Both explore the myth of the American dream as a collapsed ideal and follow characters that are bound by the compulsion to keep moving regardless of motive or intent. The film is a paean to the romance of transience and the road, something that has been a recurring preoccupation and a theme throughout Wenders' entire body of work. Prior to Paris, Texas, he'd made his road movie trilogy consisting of Alice in the Cities in 1974, The Wrong Move in 75, and Kings of the Road in 76. All would feature the same cinematographer, Robbie Muller, who had also worked with Wenders on all of his projects leading up to the trilogy, and also The American Friend, made just after. Over the course of those projects, Muller and Wenders had developed a visual language of their own, and Paris, Texas is really the culmination of that synchronicity. In addition to this, the film was written by playwright, actor and director Sam Shepard, who passed away shortly before Harry Dean Stanton earlier this year, and actor, screenwriter and producer L.M. Kit Carson. Carson's son Hunter would end up playing the young boy of the same name in the film on the grounds that he'd be accompanied by his mother, who happened to be Karen Black, who starred in two other classics of the road movie genre in Easy Rider and Five Easy Pieces. The screenplay grew out of a combination of Shepard's Motel Chronicles, which is a collection of short stories and autobiographical accounts, and also Wenders' own travels through America in the early 1980s, which I'll come back to in a moment. Shepard had offered the lead role of Travis to Stanton following a conversation with him in which he'd expressed a dissatisfaction with the roles he'd played throughout his career, and a desire to play a character with real beauty and sensitivity. And it becomes clear when watching interviews with him, particularly Sophie Huber's 2013 documentary Partly Fiction, that the character of Travis bears a close resemblance to his own slightly vulnerable and world-weary demeanour. Stanton had appeared in over 100 films prior to Paris, Texas, which, intentional or not, imbued his presence with an almost palpable exhaustion. In the role of Travis's estranged wife, Jane, is Nastasia Kinski, daughter of Klaus Kinski, who'd made her film debut at the age of 12 in the second of Wenders' road movie trilogy, The Wrong Move in 75. She was apparently discovered by Wenders' wife in a disco in Munich and went on to work with Wolfgang Petersen, Francis Ford Coppola, Roman Polanski, and Paul Schrader before reuniting with Wenders for Paris, Texas. Travis's brother Walt was played by another actor at his wit's end with the industry, Dean Stockwell, who was allegedly preparing to quit acting and become a real estate agent. Thankfully, he was convinced otherwise and continued to grace us with his inimitable, eccentric, smoke-damaged eminence. I'm thinking very specifically of Blue Velvet and Quantum Leap here. Playing Walt's wife is Aurora Clement, who, like Kinski, had already worked with some of the most renowned and revered voices in world cinema, including Louis Malle, Milos Forman, Francis Ford Coppola, Chantal Akerman, and Claude Chabrol. On top of an already formidable and diverse group of artists, Wenders also sought out the talents of Ry Cooder to provide a score for the film. Cooder was already established by this point, and this wasn't his first foray into the world of cinema, most notably having worked on Nicholas Roeg's Performance in 1970 and Walter Hill's Southern Comfort in 1980. Wenders and Cooder would collaborate again in 1999 on the massively successful Buena Vista Social Club, which Cooder also produced. His work for Paris, Texas, however, remains one of the iconic film scores of all time, and I envy those of you that have yet to experience it in its original glory. He based it on another American blues classic in Blind Willie Johnson's Dark Was the Night, Cold Was the Ground, And once you hear it describing those desolate images of the desert or the neon-lit loneliness of the cityscape, it becomes hard to imagine them without hearing that slide guitar echoing across the landscape, haunting and comforting in the same breath. The result of this company of creative minds is a film that is driven in equal measure by each of its components, all subtly pacing each other and negotiating a delicate path between sincerity, sensitivity, honesty, and art. In 1983, Wenders set about gathering images that would form the basis for Paris, Texas. He traveled 1,500 miles along the Mexico border, armed with a Makina Plaubel 6x7 camera, through Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, capturing fragments of a landscape saturated in the mythology of the frontier. The images show us a desolate small-town America, all but extinct, brought vividly to life in a stark collage of vibrant colors. As you may have deduced from the images you see here on the screen, I've drawn very direct parallels between Wenders and Muller and the work of photographers Stephen Shaw and William Eggleston. While I'm positive there may be plenty of other useful comparisons to be made, all bear a striking resemblance in how they perceive what may at first seem banal, but in actual fact are uniquely defining of American iconography. One fairly obvious similarity is the use of colour. Both Shaw and Eggleston are widely regarded for having pioneered the use of colour in art photography, which until the mid-70s have more or less been limited to black and white. Further to this, the subjects of those images had scarcely been captured with the same kind of fascination as Shaw and Eggleston would credit them with. These were images of the things which made up the fabric of America and that documented the reality of a faded dream in all its mundane detail. For all of their effort to remain unremarkable, they are, by virtue, an invaluable series of portraits of lives lived and exhausted promise. In this sense, they paint an overwhelmingly honest picture of a culture bombarded by notions of glamour, success, and enterprise, suspended in a state of hypnagogic beauty. They can be of anywhere and they can be of nowhere. The importance of colour is also a central characteristic of Paris, Texas, with every or almost every scene predominantly bathed or at least featuring red, white, blue, or green. While there are a few variations on how we can interpret these, it's broadly understood at least that the red, white, and blue are representative of the American flag as a symbol of the American dream, and the dream of a life that Travis has left behind, yet still struggles to let go of. Bolder shades of these colours interject an otherwise realist palette throughout, and this can be read as an interruption of that fantasy or an exaggeration of it. Occasionally they signify discovery, reality, and by proxy, some idea of truth, sometimes jarring, sometimes confusing, and sometimes more directly in conflict with the fugue state in which Travis has been living. The saturation, intensity, and arrangement of these tones varies as Travis's engagement with the world shifts between the past and the present, breaking in and out of his psychogenic connection with reality. This also echoes an overarching theme of the road movie in that of a shifting identity. As well as becoming one of the foremost voices in world cinema, Wenders would also become a notable photographer. The images he gathered in preparation for Paris, Texas would form a series entitled Written in the West, which was exhibited 2 years after the release of the film at the Pompidou Center in 1986 in Paris. Since then, his photographic work has continued to focus on landscapes, time and memory, and the narrative that resides in images of desolation. Both aesthetically and narratively, Paris, Texas conveys the same diaristic tone that we see in the work of Shaw and Eggleston. As evidenced in Wenders' first pictures of the place he'd only ever imagined, Travis's journey throughout the film is shown to us as though it were a document of that environment. The film is as much about where it is as it is about the way in which its characters' lives interconnect and unfold. For all of these artists, the road signifies movement and encapsulates the diversity of an ever-changing cultural and social landscape. In this regard, Paris, Texas is one of the quintessential road movies in which the arc of our central protagonist is laid out in the highways and byways he navigates. There are a great many more things to take from this film, and it's been something I've returned to many times since I first saw it. It not only helps shape a number of my interests, but particularly in photography, but it also tries to reveal something of the complexity of human connection and how we live out our desires and confront the shadows of our past. At times, the detail and depth of each character can be uncomfortably frank, but it's never without value. And this is perfectly reflected towards the end of the film in what I think is one of the most beautiful and disarming monologues in cinema history. I'm going to let you savor the film for yourselves in a moment, but I'll take this opportunity to remind you to come and see the last of our Harry Dean Stanton tribute films, which will be Lucky, directed by John Carroll Lynch, and features Harry Dean in more or less his final role. I managed to catch a little bit of it on Monday. I can tell you that it's definitely a befitting swan song for him, so be sure to come and see it. The first show of that will be Friday at 7 o'clock, and then there's a couple more showings after that, but visit metrocinema.org for details. That is all from me, but thank you very much for listening, and I sincerely hope you all enjoy this magnificent film.